Thanksgiving has always carried a strange weight in my family. It was supposed to be a holiday about gratitude, a time to gather under one roof and remember that, despite arguments, despite disappointments, we were bound together. But that year, the house smelled of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and warm bread rolls only on the surface. Beneath the aromas lingered tension, sharp and metallic, like the tang of blood in the air before a storm. I sat at the long oak table, the same one I had grown up around. Its surface was polished to a sheen, but I knew every scratch and dent in its wood. Marks left behind by childhood dinners, slammed homework assignments, and late-night cups of tea. That night, it felt less like a table and more like a stage, and I was unprepared for the role I was about to be cast into. I tried to focus on the food in front of me. The mashed potatoes, whipped smooth, were still steaming. My aunt had carved slices of ham to pass around. My mom fussed with cranberry sauce, and my younger brother hunched over his plate, shoveling food as though he could swallow the silence that had settled between us. I thought maybe, for once, this dinner might go smoothly, that we could pretend to be the picture-perfect family we sometimes looked like in photos. But then my father set down his fork. The sound was deliberate, louder than it needed to be, and it cut through the small chatter like a knife. His face was impassive for a moment, then his eyes narrowed and locked onto mine. I felt my shoulders stiffen, though I had done nothing but sit quietly. And then, with the whole family watching, he said the words that still echo in my head. "You're a leech. You can't stay here after November bills." The syllables didn't just fall into the room, they detonated. My mother's hand jerked, her wineglass clinking against her plate as she tried to hush him. "Robert, not now," she whispered, her voice thin and tight, but he didn't look at her. My brother lowered his head, stabbing his fork into his turkey, pretending to be fascinated by the food. My aunt cleared her throat and shifted in her chair, her eyes darting between us like she was hoping someone else would intervene. No one did. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, suffocating, pressing down on me like a physical weight. I felt the blood rush to my face, hot and humiliating. The word leech echoed inside my head, bouncing against the walls of memory, where all my quiet efforts lived. The groceries I'd picked up with my meager paycheck, the electricity bill I had chipped in for, the nights I stayed home instead of going out, saving every cent to show I wasn't a burden. None of it mattered. To him, I was nothing more than a parasite clinging to his wallet. I wanted to defend myself. The arguments rose in my throat, reminders of my part-time hours at the bookstore, my endless cycle of job applications, the constant pressure I felt to land something stable in a job market that chewed up young graduates and spit them out. But when I looked into his eyes, I knew it was useless. He hadn't spoken to me. He had pronounced judgment. The room blurred at the edges as my vision swam with unshed tears. My father leaned back in his chair, folding his arms, as though satisfied with his declaration. My mom glanced at me, her lips parting like she wanted to say something, but no words came. Her silence stung almost as much as his cruelty. I forced my face into something resembling a smile, though my jaw trembled. The turkey on my plate went untouched, the gravy congealing around it like cold cement. I heard the scrape of cutlery as my relatives tried to carry on, each of them pretending the moment hadn't happened. But the air in that room was poisoned. Every laugh after that sounded hollow, every word brittle. I sat there, staring down at the food I could no longer taste, and all I could think was how badly I wanted to vanish. to fold myself into the cracks of the table, to slip out of my own skin, to become invisible so I wouldn't have to carry the weight of their stares. When I finally stood, pushing back my chair with a calmness I didn't feel, I murmured something about not feeling well. My voice was steady, but inside, a storm raged. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, heavy and insistent. No one stopped me. No one asked me to stay. I walked out of the dining room, my back straight, my steps slow and deliberate, but every movement felt like dragging chains behind me. As I passed the hallway mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself, eyes glistening, cheeks flushed, and I barely recognized the girl looking back. Thanksgiving was supposed to be about gratitude, but as I shut myself away in my childhood bedroom, the word carved itself into my mind over and over again. Leech. And in that moment, though I didn't know what would come next, I understood that something fundamental between my father and me had broken, and it could never be put back the same way again. I didn't sleep. I lay there with my eyes open to the dark, watching the soft pulse of the router light across the room blink, 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 as if the house itself had a heartbeat, and I'd fallen out of rhythm with it. His words looped in my head, not spoken but branded, a scar that kept reopening. A leech. It wasn't just the insult. It was the public verdict, the way he'd set it down between the gravy boat and the green beans like an indisputable fact. For years he told me I was resilient, that he admired my stubborn spine, my habit of finishing what I started. Now the same mouth had spit me out like something rotten. My chest ached as if shame had a physical temperature, and it was burning its way through. I turned onto my side and stared at the wall where I'd once taped college acceptance letters, half-faded rectangles lighter than the paint around them. There used to be pride in that spot. Tonight, it felt like a museum label next to a piece of my life that had already been taken down. I pictured my father at the table, arms folded like a barrier, impenetrable, already convinced. There was no speech I could have given, no spreadsheet of expenses, no list of shifts and applications and interviews that would have changed his mind. He hadn't launched a conversation. He delivered a sentence. When the red numbers of the digital clock changed from 4:59 to 5 o'clock, I gave up pretending. I sat up and the room tilted for a second, the way it does when you stand too fast and the blood rushes to catch you. The house was a cathedral of quiet. The heating kicked on with a soft exhale. The branches outside scratched the siding in the breeze. And somewhere down the hall a pipe ticked, as if counting my time left here. I swung my feet to the floor and felt the familiar dip in the rug where I'd stood every morning. The familiarity hurt. I pulled a stack of black garbage bags from my closet and shook one open. The sound was indecently loud in the pre-dawn. I filled it with jeans and sweaters, the kind of clothes that promised warmth without ceremony. The second bag swallowed shoes. The third bag was stranger, full of life fragments that didn't fit anywhere neat. A scarf my aunt knitted during a winter my hands never warmed, the lanyard from my bookstore job, the cracked phone stand I'd glued 3 times. Every zipper I pulled felt like sealing a little mouth that might have spoken up for me. Books were heavier than I remembered. I lined them spine to spine in 2 low boxes until my arms trembled. There was my dog-eared copy of Beloved, the margin notes so familiar. I could see myself at 19, underlining in purple, convinced that careful attention was a kind of love. There were the career guides I'd marked with sticky flags like prayers. I added my journal last, the pages soft as cloth at the corners, each rejection circled in red, not because I needed the reminder, but because at the time it felt like proof that I was still in the fight. I'd pressed the leather cover flat and slid it on top as if it were a keystone. Foam first, I told myself. If I was leaving clean, I had to cut every thread I could control. I sat cross-legged on the floor and dialed my carrier. The automated voice greeted me in syrupy cheerfulness. "How can I help you today?" I threaded the prompts. Remove from family plan, port the number, disable autopay. A few minutes on hold, a flurry of verifications. Mother's maiden name, last 4 digits. This is recorded consent. And it was done. One tap and my contribution to the Wi-Fi transfer, $25, every month like a ritual of goodwill, was canceled. I unfurled my streaming subscriptions and watched the "Are you sure?" warnings pop up like little ghosts. Yes, yes, yes. The confirmations stacked in my inbox like a line of closed doors. When I stood, the room looked skinned. The space where my jewelry dish had lived was a faint circle of dust-free wood. The nail where a calendar had hung was an accusing dot above my dresser. I opened the bottom drawer and found the photo strip from a freshman year fair. Me and a girl with sunburned noses and funnel cakes, laughing with our heads thrown back. I held it between my fingers until the laughter blurred, then tucked it safe in the journal's back pocket. The sky outside the blinds had shifted from pitch to bruise. I moved through the hallway on the balls of my feet, passing the framed family photos like a lineup. I was no longer sure I belonged in. My kindergarten picture with the missing front tooth. The 4 of us at a state park, sleeves tied around our waists, standing in front of a waterfall that misted the air into glitter. My father's arm lay heavy across my shoulders in that one, anchoring, proud. I couldn't reconcile that arm with last night's voice. Maybe that was the real pain. The mismatch between memory and evidence. The knowledge that both could be true, and the second still ruined the first. In the kitchen, the dishwasher hummed softly. A practical mercy my mother must have said after the plates clattered into it. I opened the fridge and took the little things that were mine. The yogurt cups I'd bought. The jar of peanut butter that always demanded a stir. The bag of coffee I rationed like a secret. I left the pie I'd baked yesterday morning before everything fell apart. It felt symbolic. Gratitude that no longer belonged to me. Sweetness I wasn't taking with me out of spite or out of kindness. I wasn't sure. I wrote a note on a sticky pad and pressed it to the counter. "I'll text when I'm settled. I'm not taking the car charger." It was nothing, and it was too much. Back in my room, I zipped the last bag, tied the plastic handles in fists, and lined everything near the door. The weight of my life looked absurd, as if I'd swallowed an entire house and only managed to keep a few ribs. I slid my laptop into its case and looped the strap across my chest. When I turned off the lamp, the dimness felt honest. Carrying it all to the driveway took 3 trips. The November air was cold enough to cut. My breath showed itself, cloud after cloud, like proof I was still here. The Honda's trunk yawned, and I played a small game of Tetris with the boxes. A neighbor's bedroom light clicked on and off. Somewhere a dog announced the morning. I shut the trunk, and the sound startled a flight of birds from the maple. I looked up reflexively, then immediately back down, as if catching the sky doing something private. I went in one last time, not because I needed anything else, but because endings require witnesses. In the doorway of my room, I placed my house key on the dresser. No drama. No note. The metal made a tiny sound against the wood, modest as a period at the end of a sentence. I stood still and waited for grief to behave itself. It didn't. It moved through me uncooperatively, throat to chest to stomach, heavy and mean, then quieter, then heavy again. I let. At the front door, I hesitated, hand on the knob. There was a version of me who would have waited for daylight, for an apology, for a justification that would make staying feel like strength. That version was good at hope, even when there was no evidence for it. I loved her. I couldn't be her anymore. I opened the door. The morning had fully arrived while I'd been ferrying boxes. Sky washed pale, the world sketched in crisp lines. I locked the door from the outside and tested it, an old instinct. The metal was cool under my palm. I stood on the porch for 3 breaths, 3 precise measures. One for the child who grew up here, one for the teenager who wanted to leave, and then didn't, one for the young woman who could. At the car, I paused again, and in the stillness, the mind does what it always does when it's hurt. It offered me the greatest hits of his voice. Leech, after November bills. Each phrase arrived like a stone in my pocket. I put my hand on the driver's door and whispered, because there was no one to hear me, and because I needed to hear myself. I'll never give him the chance to call me that again. The words didn't erase the pain. It stayed, faithful and heavy, like a raincoat soaked through. But under it, faint and insistent, something embered. It wasn't relief, and it wasn't victory. It was smaller and more dangerous. A spark of determination, catching at the edges of everything I had just decided to carry and everything I had chosen to leave behind. The drive to Rachel's apartment was longer than I remembered. My old Honda rattled along the empty roads, the heater struggling against the November cold, the headlights cutting a pale path through the darkness. Every mile felt like both an escape and a retreat. I kept waiting for the ache in my chest to lessen, for the shame to loosen its grip. It didn't. But something else began to stir beneath it, subtle and stubborn, like a green shoot forcing its way through ash. Rachel lived on the 3rd floor of a squat brick building that smelled faintly of laundry detergent and dust. When she opened the door, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, I almost broke down. She didn't ask questions, didn't press me to explain. She just stepped aside and let me in, the gesture as natural as breathing. The apartment was cramped. 2 mismatched chairs, a sagging couch, a tiny kitchenette barely big enough for one person to cook in. But to me, it looked like a fortress, safe, untouched by my father's voice. Rachel pressed a chipped mug of coffee into my hands, the kind of cheap instant brew she always favored, and said softly, "You don't deserve that. This could be your fresh start." Her words clung to me as I sat on the couch, cupping the warmth of the mug between my palms. For the first time in days, I felt heat that didn't come from anger or humiliation. Maybe she was right. Maybe being pushed out was its own kind of opening. I moved my bags into the corner of her living room, careful not to spread too much. The garbage bags sagged. The books bent the cardboard boxes, and yet in this small space, they looked like possibility instead of failure. My entire life was condensed into those bundles, but here they didn't accuse me of being a burden. They reminded me I had something to rebuild from. The first thing I did was sit down with my bank app open and a notebook spread across my lap. Numbers stared back at me, sharp and unforgiving, but also honest. No hidden costs, no family bills tacked on, no unexplained household contributions, just mine. Rent, food, gas, the little left over. It wasn't much, but it was something I could shape. I drew a line through every indulgence. No more takeout lunches at work, no new clothes until absolutely necessary, no streaming services. The list was brutal, but with every cut I felt lighter. The ledger wasn't just money. It was proof that I could live on my own terms. At the bookstore, I asked for extra shifts. The manager raised an eyebrow, but nodded, grateful for the help. My hands grew dry from unpacking shipments. My legs ached from standing at the register, but the exhaustion carried a strange sweetness. It wasn't tied to resentment. It was the price of momentum. Each shift was one more step away from dependence, one more notch in a ladder I was building. At night, I hunched over Rachel's wobbly dining table, my laptop glowing against the dim light of the single overhead bulb. Job applications became a ritual. I tailored each resume carefully, swapping out verbs, reshaping bullet points, combing through descriptions to match the language. Cover letters became small essays in resilience, crafted with the precision of someone who could no longer afford to be overlooked. I tracked everything in a spreadsheet. Positions applied for, dates, follow-ups, like a general mapping out a battle. The rejections still came. Some were polite form emails, others were silence that stretched on until I knew the answer. But the sting was different now. It wasn't layered with my father's contempt, wasn't proof that I was failing. Each no was another brick laid in the road forward. I was moving, even if the progress was invisible for now. Rachel noticed the change. She'd find me asleep on the couch with my laptop still glowing, or remind me to eat when I lost myself in applications. Her kindness wasn't loud, but it was steady, like a scaffold holding me up until I could stand on my own. She never treated me like a guest overstaying my welcome. She treated me like someone worthy of the space I occupied, and that quiet dignity mattered more than she knew. I started to feel something I hadn't felt in months: control. Not control over the world, not control over my father's judgment or the whims of hiring managers, but control over myself. My choices, my hours, my small victories. The discipline became its own kind of freedom. Each night, I collapsed into the thin blanket Rachel had offered, body aching from work, eyes heavy from screen glow. And yet, beneath the exhaustion, there was a hum of something fierce and unyielding. I was no longer waiting for approval that would never come. I was building a life, even if it was brick by brick, rejection by rejection, shift by shift. For the first time in months, I closed my eyes not with dread of what tomorrow might bring, but with a steady knowledge that whatever came, I had the will to meet it. The ashes of humiliation were still warm, but hope was growing in them, quiet, insistent, alive. I'd imagined my father would be relieved that I left without theatrics, that my absence would settle into the house like furniture rearranged, noticeable at first, then ordinary. Instead, not even a full day later, his fist detonated against Rachel's door in a rhythm that wasn't knocking so much as accusation. The sound traveled through the thin hallway like a warning siren, rattling the frame, sending dust down in a delicate halo. On the second volley, a door across the hall cracked open and a neighbor's eye appeared in the gap, then vanished. Feet paused on the stairwell. The building itself seemed to hold its breath. Rachel looked at me. No speeches, just a question in her eyebrows. "Are you sure?" I nodded. The chain slid back with a small, decisive scrape. I opened the door. My father filled the threshold, the way a storm fills a sky, fast, total, swallowing nuance. Color rode high in his face, the kind that begins at the collar and climbs. His jaw worked, the muscle there pulsing. When he spoke, the words arrived already in motion, hurled rather than offered. How dare you leave like that? You think you can just cut us off? Who do you think pays for everything in this family? The hall magnified him. The echo, the smell of cold air on his coat, the heat of him crowding into the frame. He dressed in anger, jacket tugged one notch too high, tied crooked as if he yanked it on the way out the door. His eyes were glossy, not with tears, but with indignation so completed, bordered on conviction. If a stranger had seen us then, they might have thought he was a man rescuing a daughter from danger. In his mind, that's what this was, intervention, not intrusion. I felt my hands begin to tremble, a delicate tremor that started in my fingers and traveled up my forearms like a spark looking for kindling. I kept them at my sides. My voice surprised me. It arrived steady, lower than usual, as if it had dropped weight overnight. Not me, I said. Not anymore. He blinked, just once, as if the words were a pebble that had skipped in an unexpected direction. Then the volume returned. You think this is a game, Emily? You cancel the phone, the Wi-Fi, you dump your share of the bills, and you run off before we even finish the leftovers? Your mother couldn't reach her doctor this morning because the family plan changed without notice. The cable bill bounced in automatic payment. Do you even understand what that does to our credit? He leaned in, voice lowered to something that cut sharper. You don't get to burn the house down and act like you're saving us from the smoke. Behind me, I felt Rachel take a small breath. She didn't move, but her presence anchored me like a hand at the center of my back. I let the breath wash through me. Fear wanted to rush the moment, to say I'm sorry just to make it stop. But another part of me, something newly lit and stubborn, refused to hand him the lighter and call it compromise. I took my name off what I was paying. I said, that's not arson. That's me refusing to keep pretending I live there under your terms. You told me I couldn't stay after November bills. You said I was a leech. The word tasted less like poison when I said it aloud. I left so you wouldn't have to keep looking at me. His mouth tightened. For a flicker of a second, I saw the man who taught me to ride a bike, one hand on the seat, jogging beside me until he let go. That man had offered risk as a vote of confidence. The man in front of me offered control as care and called it love. You don't get to twist this, he said. I make the payments. I keep the lights on. I built that roof. You think you can just decide when you're part of this family and when you're not? A door down the hall opened wider. A woman in a robe glanced up the corridor, then retreated with a soft sorry when my father's gaze snapped to her. He lowered his voice, not from courtesy, but calculation, a performance adjustment now that he had an audience. Come home, he said, and in the softened thread of that command, there was the old currency, obedience for peace. We'll talk like adults. You can't just walk away from responsibilities. Whose responsibilities? I asked. Mine? I'm carrying mine. The ones you assigned me to prove I deserved to sleep under your roof. Those were never responsibilities. They were ransom. You named the price and changed it whenever you felt like it. My heart was thudding now, a clean, percussive beat. Not frantic, but insistent. I'm not negotiating my existence anymore. He tried a different angle, the one he'd always relied on when force didn't land, the ledger of his sacrifices. I worked double shifts the year you were born, he said, as if I hadn't heard the story 100 times. I put off getting the truck fixed so we could afford braces. I didn't take vacations for 10 years. You think money appears by magic? I paid for your life, Emily. And I'm grateful, I said, and I meant it. Gratitude and boundary can occupy the same sentence. But gratitude isn't a deed to my adulthood. You don't get equity in my person because you paid my orthodontist. His eyes flashed. The anger wasn't random. It has structure, an architecture of fear and pride, and the myth that authority is love's highest expression. My father grew up poor enough to know the map of hunger. In his world, money wasn't just survival, it was proof he had beaten back the chaos. My leaving, my cutting off the tiny tributaries that had made me beholden, felt to him like a return of that chaos. I could almost hear the translation happening in his head. If I don't control this, I can't protect anyone. He stepped forward, a bare inch, and the motion clicked something inside me into place. The threshold is a law. It separates public from private, past from present, obedience from choice. I straightened. You can be angry, I said, and the steadiness surprised me again. You can even decide you don't like me very much right now, but you don't get to come to my friends' house and pound on the door and try to scare me back into being small. I'm not coming with you. We are not having this conversation in the hallway. I am not a child you can pick up by the collar. I am done living as a receipt you keep in your wallet. He stared at me, and for a fraction of a second I saw the swerve, the choice point where he could step back, where he could say my name the way a father says it when he wants to build a bridge instead of a wall. Then I watched the opportunity pass over his face like a cloud sliding over the sun. You're ungrateful, he said, defaulting to the oldest indictment. You've always been ungrateful. You think you're strong because you slammed a few digital doors. Wait until you need something. I already needed something, I said. I needed you not to humiliate me at a table full of relatives. I needed a father who could be disappointed without being cruel. I needed a house that didn't make me pay rent in silence. Those doors are closed now. Not the digital ones, the other kind. Rachel shifted behind me, and I could feel rather than see her chin lift, a small, private salute. My father's breath fogged in the cooler air of the hall. He lifted a hand, not to strike, never that, but to punctuate. He always talked with his hands when he wanted to control the narrative, conducting it like an orchestra only he could hear. The gesture hung there, then fell. Something in him recognized, maybe for the first time, that my refusal wasn't a phase. It was a position. You'll regret this, he said, but there was less steel in it, more fatigue, as if he'd swung a hammer at a stud and found a void. Maybe, I said, but the regret will be mine to manage. That's the point. For a moment, none of us moved. The building settled. A pipe clanked. Someone coughed 2 floors down. The world, indifferent and practical, continued. I put my hand on the edge of the door, not hiding the motion, not apologizing for it. I met his eyes, his not the role he played for himself, and tried to place my words where they might eventually be found. I love you, I said quietly, but I am not staying in a version of love that requires me to disappear. His mouth opened, closed. He looked past me then, over my shoulder into the little living room, at the couch with its pilled throw, at the stack of boxes by the wall, at the coffee mug on the table with a lipstick smudge that wasn't mine. Maybe what he saw was smallness. I hope he saw a beginning. I didn't wait for permission. I didn't deliver a speech to make it easier for him to accept. I drew the door toward me. The hinges sighed. The rectangle of hallway narrowed. His figure cut into a slice, then a sliver, then a line. His voice rose once more. My name, sharp, almost a command, and then the latch caught. On my side of the wood, I stood for a long second with my palm flat against it, feeling the echo of his pounding transform into the echo of my pulse. My heart hammered, loud enough that it seemed to vibrate the paint. It wasn't fear anymore. It was impact. What happens when a moving body meets a boundary and both learn its strength? I breathed in. I breathed out. Behind me, Rachel didn't say good job, or I'm proud of you, or I'm sorry. She did something better. She crossed the room and clicked off the hallway light. The apartment fell into the kind of quiet that isn't empty but earned. My spirit, still ringing, found its center and held. The job offer arrived on a Tuesday at 9:12 a.m. A tidy email with my name spelled right and a start date that fit into the calendar like a missing puzzle piece. Junior Marketing Associate. The title didn't glint, but it held. I read the message twice, then a third time, as if steadiness could be confirmed by repetition. When I called Rachel from the bus stop to tell her, the words felt new in my mouth. Small, sturdy bricks I could stack into a life. The office sat on the 4th floor of a converted factory. Exposed brick, high windows, the kind of plants that survive on negligence. On my first morning, a designer named Mia showed me my desk, an L shape tucked near the window, where the radiator hissed like an old roommate. The computer was used, the swivel chair squeaked, and the mousepad had a coffee ring in one corner. It was perfect. I signed HR forms with the slow care of someone who had learned the hard way that every signature is a hinge. Work had its own music. A Slack ping here, a cluster of keys there, the soft shush of people thinking together. My tasks arrived in measured increments. Draft 4 social captions that don't sound like they were written by a robot. Schedule a week of posts without stacking them all at noon. Rewrite a product description so the benefits breathe. Find the verbs that lift without lying. I built a color-coded calendar, learned the CMS, learned that UTM parameters are not a suggestion if you care about where visitors come from, and learned how to say, I can take that, without volunteering to drown. When I got stuck, Mia would roll over in her chair and ask, what's the story this line is trying to tell? It was the right question every time. By the end of week 1, I could feel a muscle I didn't know I had. Professional self-trust begin to flex. My first campaign went live on a Thursday afternoon. A modest carousel about a winter promotional bundle. No fireworks. But when I refreshed the analytics dashboard and watched the first clicks register, I felt something settle in my chest. Not exhilaration. Not yet. Dignity. My work had entered the world and moved, however slightly, another person's hand. The first paycheck cleared the following Friday. I opened my banking app at lunch and stared with a focus that bordered on reverence. Money has a way of translating boundary into reality. Here was the proof that my time, my mind, my effort had become rent and groceries, and a little extra for a second-hand lamp I didn't need but wanted. I withdrew cash and paid my rent in person at the leasing office, a ritual I chose because I wanted to feel the exchange, the way a promise feels when it passes from palm to desk. I walked out with a receipt that felt heavier than paper. My apartment came together the way a sentence does when you finally find the right verb. A thrifted pine table that bore a history of knife nicks and heat stains. 2 mismatched chairs. One with a cane back that sang a little when you sat. The other upholstered in a fabric printed with lemons faded to pale moons. A couch acquired through a local listing carried up 2 flights with the help of a retiree neighbor who grunted and then told me stories about his stint as a jazz drummer. A lamp with a pleated shade that when lit, made the whole room look kinder. Each object carried the hum of its former life and its new use. Together, they made a home that felt patched, honest, mine. I learned the schedule of the building, the clatter of the mail carrier at 11:05, the upstairs kids' piano practice that lingered in halting scales around dinner, the elevator that groaned like an old storyteller, but never failed. I put a small spider plant on the windowsill and watched it catch the thin winter sun, then reward me with a new shoot. I fed myself on purpose, pasta with garlic and oil and too much black pepper, roasted carrots blistered at the edges, eggs folded soft with a handful of spinach. Not fancy, not austere, just meals that declared I was worth the time it took to cook them. December advanced with its understated march. Dark early, halos of breath in the morning, the city stitched in strings of light, as if someone had decided illumination should be seasonal. There was no invitation from my parents, not even a gauzy text that could pass as a branch extended. The absence stung, a clean, undeniable ache that made the cold feel colder. I let it be what it was without naming it an omen. On Christmas Day, I worked by choice. A short morning shift scheduled in the social calendar to catch the brand's holiday traffic. The office was closed, but my laptop and I have learned to be industrious anywhere. I queued 2 posts, replied to a handful of cheerful comments with cheerful copy, then shut it down. In the afternoon, Rachel came over balancing a pie tin on a potholder like a trophy. We cooked in my tiny kitchen the way you cook when space argues and you answer with choreography. She chopped while I stirred. I slid the pan into the oven while she set the table with plates that didn't match and silverware that had shared strangers' drawers before mine. Dinner was simple because simple is sometimes the only honest extravagance. Roast chicken, the skin crackling at the ankles, potatoes smashed just enough to keep their ridges, a salad that crunched like fresh snow. I lit a single candle in a thrifted brass holder, and for a moment, the room looked like it belonged to a painting. Light pooled, shadows softened, everything arranged by care more than cost. We ate until we were full in the way that isn't just stomach, but nerve and mind. After we cleared the plates, I stood at the sink with my hands in warm, sudsy water and said the words that had been waiting like a held breath. I'm not a leech. I'm free. It wasn't a defiant whisper. It was a statement absorbed by tile and steam and the hum of an old radiator. Rachel didn't turn it into a ceremony. She tapped the faucet with her wrist, adjusted the temperature, and handed me a rinsed plate. The right kind of witness. Later alone, I walked the length of my apartment, the way people walk the edges of a new yard, reacquainting themselves with their own perimeter. The floorboards creaked in a pattern I already knew. The plant on the sill opened its newest leaf half an inch more. In the mirror above the dresser, I saw a face that carried the history of the last months, but not the posture. My shoulders weren't braced the way they used to be. My jaw was less clenched. I looked, there's no other word for it, unburdened. I think about my father's words less as a wound now and more as an origin story with a slant. He meant to diminish. Instead, he defined a border I hadn't known how to draw. His attempt to push me out became the shove that dislodged me from a shape I no longer fit. It is not grace I feel toward his cruelty, and not forgiveness, not yet. It is something harder to name. The recognition that pressure can be a forge, that humiliation can harden into resolve without turning the heart to stone. At work, I keep a yellow sticky note under my keyboard where no one sees it. On it, not a mantra, not a curse, just a line I wrote on a quiet morning after coffee. write so people feel seen, live so you do too. When tasks stack up and the inbox swells like a tide, I touch that paper and return to center. When I walk home in the evening, lights stitched across balconies, I think about the strange arithmetic of the past weeks, how subtraction of bills, of silence, of permission made room for addition, the kind that counts. Now, whenever life tilts, whenever a voice, his, mine, the world's, suggests I'm too heavy to carry, I return to that table, that word, that night. I hold the insult like metal in a palm and feel how cold it can be if you don't put it to use. Then I set it in the engine of what I'm building. It burns cleaner there. It powers the next sentence, the next application, the next small choice made without apology. Because sometimes the cruelest injustice is the spark, not a gift. You don't owe it that name, but an ignition. If you're ready with kindling, work, friends who open doors without demanding explanations, a budget that tells the truth, you can make a blaze out of it. I did. And in the light of that fire, I can see my own outline clearly. Not dependent, not diminished, not waiting to be named. Just here, in a room of my choosing, earning my life as I live it.